I'm Roger Armstrong and this is my Trojan motor car. The Trojan was designed in 1913 by a man called Leslie Hounsfield, and he had the idea of redesigning the motor car completely, eliminating all the things that would go wrong with a motor car in 1913. So he got rid of engine valves, differential, he even got rid of pneumatic tyres in his concept of designing the perfect economy car that would go forever, last forever, and give the minimum of trouble on the road. 1913 was the year before the First War, and the First World War interrupted the whole development of the car, set it back. Several prototypes were made during the war, and after the war he looked around for a large company to build the car, and Leyland Motors had recently acquired, this is in the early 1920s, they'd acquired a large factory unit which had been hawkers in Kingston. The idea of Leyland was to recondition all the lorries that came back from the front in the First World War and resell them. But they were running out of lorries in the early 1920s and they were looking for other projects, and the Trojan fitted the bill. Leyland were also hoping to market a huge luxury car, the Leyland 8, but it was actually the Trojan which made them some money and brought them into mass production of motor vehicles. This is a Trojan car of 1924, and I was always keen on Trojans as a little boy. One day I hoped to own a Trojan, and eventually this car came up for sale and at the right price. It was quite a well-known car in the Trojan Owners Club. It's one of the early cars, and so this is the early pattern car. It was designed originally to have solid tyres. This car was taken back to the factory in 1925 to have pneumatic tyres fitted, but other than that is absolutely original. It's been in long-term, it's only in 2 or 3 ownerships in its entire existence. It was originally bought by Captain Hedley Elliott, who served in the Essex Regiment and the Artist Rifles during the First World War. After the war, he acquired a small fruit farm near Billingshurst in Sussex. And the Trojan was advertised as the ideal car for the small farmer because it was capable of use off-road. In fact, Trojan advertisements showed the car pulling a plough on a rough field. It was advertised as the car that sees you through. Hedley Elliott married in 1925, and his wife owned a Talbot 818, and eventually the Talbot became the family car, and the Trojan was just used around the farm. It was last taxed in 1927, and eventually it was left in a barn. Chickens roosted on it, and it was just rather neglected and run down. In 1956, the son of the original owner advertised the car for sale in Motorsport, and it was bought by Peter Redman, and he bought the Trojan as his first car, and he spent 6 or 9 months restoring it, and he painted it this rather sort of primrose colour. He used it as a family car up until about the mid-1960s, and then he used it just as a vintage car to attend Trojan Owners Club events. By about 1980, the gearbox needed reconditioning, and the car was off the road then until 2012. I acquired it in 2013, so it has a continuous history. It's had very few modifications from original. Since I bought it, I've reconditioned the electrical system because it was a poor starter. It still is, really. I put a new dynamo on it and electronic ignition. The electrics are all very easy to get to. It's got coil ignition, so they were all under this panel. Part of the concept of the car was that it would be very easy to maintain, and so it's one of the features that's very nice, because you can deal with the electrics in some comfort. Under the bonnet, where you would expect to find an engine, there is very little. There's the fuel tank, the horn and the carburettor, because the engine is under the floor. There are ways of tuning a Trojan car, to make it go faster. It's got a top speed of 34 miles per hour. Various people who are more adventurous than I am have modified Trojans in various ways, moving the carburettor closer to the engine and carrying out all sorts of alterations to increase the top speed. The car is designed around a very strange chassis. The chassis is like a baking tin. It's known as the punt, and within the tin tray sits the engine and the epicyclic gearbox. The engine is rather strange. It's a 4-cylinder, 2-stroke. On this early Trojan, it has 1520 cc's. It's got only 2 sparking plugs, although it's got 4 cylinders. So the cylinders are Siamesed. Right, so this is the epicyclic gearbox of the Trojan. It's got only 2 gears, very easy. Plus reverse, of course. It's very easy to change from forward to reverse, and you can see how it works. These bands, these are the gear bands, they grip this flywheel, they grip the gearbox, and the flywheel has a whole series of springs which give it a kind of cush drive. This is a timing mark. This is how you time the engine to get the points in the right location. So there's a mark here and a mark here. Between fully advanced and fully retarded, there's about 5 inches, I think, between these marks to adjust when you adjust the points. I've fitted electronic ignition now to make. You can see the duplex chain and the fact that the axle has no differential. There is only one brake drum on the left hand side, which in effect brakes both back wheels, just the same as on any vintage car really, with 2-wheel braking. Right up until the 1930s, Trojan still only had effectively 2-wheel brakes. Most motor manufacturers had introduced 4-wheel braking on cars by about 1926. Although there is only one brake drum, there is an additional emergency brake, and that is by putting the car into reverse gear. The car then stops very quickly in a cloud of smoke without doing any damage to the gearbox whatsoever. Trojan advertised it as being as effective as the Westinghouse brake on a steam engine. Trojans will do over 40 miles to the gallon on 1520 cc's. That was pretty good in the early 1920s. You've got to decide as a Trojan driver whether the engine's got too much fuel, just enough, or needs more fuel. And it's this mixture lever which you use to try and determine what's the case. The engine is cold, you put it on to full fuel to get the car started. If it's been running recently, it should start about midway point. If you've over primed it, if you use the primer and squirt fuel into the engine, and you overprime it, you then have to put it on full air and crank away until the engine starts. The other way, if you get stuck, really stuck, you just take the sparking plugs out, apply a match, you get a puff of flame, put the sparking plugs back in, and it should start normally. But yeah, they're a nuisance to start. It's a very strange sounding engine, even for a two-stroke. The whole bugbear of changing gears on a vintage car is done away with by the Trojan. But I do think that Hounsfield could have fitted a starter motor. That would have made life much easier for us people now the cars are old and cranky. Trojan advertised the car as being cheaper than walking. The Trojan was made under licence, as I've mentioned, by Leyland in this what had been an aircraft factory in Kingston. It was mass produced. Up to 10,000 were built altogether. They're very popular as motor vans, not so popular as a car because of the low top speed. You could still buy a Trojan car like this up into the late 1930s, because Trojan took over manufacture from 1929 after Leyland stopped making them, and they would make you a bespoke Trojan. The last one similar to this was made in 1937, just before the Second World War. After the war, they produced motor vans, originally two-stroke, but then eventually they used the Perkins diesel engine on them, and they ceased making vans in the mid-1960s.